I never expected my husband's wealthy family to welcome me, but I also never imagined they'd try to destroy me. The night his stepsister dumped filthy water on me at a Charleston wedding was only the beginning. What followed would shatter my reputation, nearly cost me my baby, and expose an $8 million secret hidden inside the Reynolds dynasty. And it all started with one storm, one I wasn't supposed to survive. I used to believe that stepping into the Reynolds family meant stepping into a life of stability, privilege, and belonging. Even if I knew I didn't come from their world, I never expected warmth or affection from them, but I did expect a baseline level of decency, the kind any human being should extend to another. It sounds naive now, almost childlike, but back then the idea of malice coming from people so polished, so publicly composed, felt impossible. Wealth in my mind did not excuse cruelty, nor did it give permission to dismantle another person's dignity. Yet the deeper I found myself entangled in their orbit, the clearer it became that some dynasties thrive not on shared values or family loyalty, but on the quiet power of exclusion. And the Reynolds family, for all their philanthropic galas and glossy magazine features, excelled at making outsiders feel like they would never measure up. I met Ethan Reynolds in the most unglamorous place imaginable, the oncology wing of a Nashville hospital. I wasn't a nurse then, used to 12-hour shifts, emergency codes, paperwork that never seemed to end, and the unique exhaustion that came from caring for people at their most vulnerable. He was the son of a dying patient, a billionaire who looked more out of place in a hospital hallway than I felt in his perfectly curated world. But love doesn't ask whether you belong, it simply forms, taking its shape from moments of shared humanity. Our relationship grew around grief and compassion, two forces that strip people bare and reveal who they truly are. I fell in love not with the Reynolds fortune, but with the man who read novels at his mother's bedside, who learned the nurses' names, who brought breakfast for the overnight staff just because he noticed how tired we looked. That man chose me, and I believed that choice would shield us from the judgments of others. What I didn't foresee was that Ethan's choice painted a target on my back. The Reynolds family operated like an empire, wealth spread across tech companies, vineyards in Napa Valley, lobbying relationships in D.C., charity networks stretching from San Francisco to New York. They weren't just rich, they were influential, and influence often breeds entitlement. When Ethan brought me home to Napa for the first time, the air practically shifted. The house itself was a masterpiece, a sprawling estate overlooking acres of vineyards, the kind of place wedding magazines drooled over. But the beauty of the exterior couldn't hide the atmosphere inside, a subtle tension that grew sharper as soon as Victoria Reynolds laid eyes on me. Her greeting was polite enough, but her smile held the stiffness of someone forcing herself to tolerate a stranger who had not been invited. Brittany, her daughter, was even less subtle. She glanced at my simple dress, my worn shoes, and the calluses on my hands like they were offensive. It wasn't the first time someone judged me for my background, but it was the first time the judgment came with such amusement, as if she'd discovered the punchline of a joke at my expense. Still, I persisted. I believed that respect could be earned over time, that kindness could soften even the most rigid hearts. Ethan assured me that his family would eventually come around. I wanted to believe him, not because I needed their approval, but because he was the man I planned to build a life with. Loving him meant, in some measure, learning to coexist with the world he came from. He didn't see their coldness the way I did. He saw them as complicated, not cruel, and maybe, back then, that distinction mattered to me too. Everything changed the moment I became pregnant. Suddenly, their interest in me surged not out of affection, but out of calculation. A child meant an heir, and an heir meant a shift in the balance of wealth, power, and legacy. Victoria began extending invitations to luncheons and charity committees. Brittany started commenting on my social media posts with little hearts and compliments that felt so forced they might as well have come from a preteen. I wasn't foolish enough to think they had softened, but part of me hoped pregnancy had inspired a truce, however fragile. But not all smiles are signs of goodwill, some are simply camouflage. The first true crack in their facade came from a single comment, delivered over a glass of expensive wine in the estate's sunroom. "We should schedule a prenatal paternity test," Victoria said, swirling the drink as if discussing the weather. "Just to ensure everything is in order for the trust, dear, it's standard procedure." Ethan erupted and Victoria quickly backtracked, claiming she hadn't meant anything by it. But the damage was already done. I knew then that acceptance had never been on the table. They weren't integrating me into the family if they were assessing my weaknesses. The second crack was deeper. A family wedding invitation arrived, a lavish ceremony in Charleston for one of Ethan's cousins. He was called away to Singapore for an emergency business trip, but he didn't want me to go alone. I insisted I could handle it. I shouldn't have. That night soaked in rain, covered in filthy water. Mocked for the amusement of people who saw me as nothing more than a disposable inconvenience, I learned what the Reynolds family was truly capable of. What they did to me wasn't spontaneous cruelty, it was orchestrated. Brittany's smile while she dumped that water, the phones held up to record me. The latter echoing from inside as I pounded on a locked door. Those moments didn't happen in isolation. They were symptoms of a deeper sickness inside that family, a belief that power gives them immunity from consequence. Ethan saved me that night, but even he couldn't save me from the storm that was coming. Looking back now, I see that the wedding incident wasn't the climax, it was the opening shot. A warning, if you will. A sign that entering the Reynolds family wasn't just a matter of marriage vows and shared futures, it was stepping into a battlefield I didn't know existed. But I wasn't raised to run from storms. I was raised to brace myself, plant my feet, and withstand whatever tried to knock me down. That night in Charleston taught me one essential truth: the Reynolds family didn't just dislike me, they intended to break me. And what they didn't anticipate was that I would learn how to fight back. If the Reynolds family had merely been distant, I could have handled that. Distance was manageable, it left room to breathe. What I wasn't prepared for was the way their hostility grew smoother, more calculated, almost elegant in its delivery as time went on. Brittany, especially, had a talent for turning cruelty into something that almost sounded like concern. She came wrapped in designer labels, flawless makeup, and a smile bright enough to fool anyone who didn't look closely. But beneath that polished exterior was a blade she wielded with pleasure, always angled toward the softest part of me. To her, I wasn't just an outsider, I was an embarrassment to the Reynolds name. Someone who didn't understand their world and had no right to step into it. And she never missed an opportunity to remind me. The first real clash came the night Ethan took me to a family dinner at the Napa estate, long before the Charleston wedding. I remember standing in the foyer, overwhelmed by the grandeur of the place, the marble floors, the sweeping staircase, the oil paintings of generations of Reynolds ancestors staring down like gatekeepers. I had chosen a simple navy dress, modest and classic, the kind that worked for any occasion. But when Brittany walked in wearing a gown that could have walked straight off a runway, the contrast between us was painfully clear. She glanced at me like she was scanning a bargain bin, then flashed Ethan a sugary smile before turning her attention back to me. "So," she said, tapping a manicured finger against her wineglass, "you re the nurse." She said the word as if it were some kind of punchline. "Yes," I replied, standing a little straighter. "I am." "That's adorable," she said, openly amused. Ethan always did have a soft spot for charity cases. Ethan immediately shut her down, but her comment lodged itself inside me like a splinter. It wasn't the insult itself, it was the way she delivered it, so casually, so confidently, as if her opinion were the only reality that mattered. And in her world it was. People listened to Brittany, they admired her, envied her, followed her online as if she were royalty. It didn't matter that her influence was built on curated images and shallow brand partnerships. She had reach, she had attention. And she had a mother who would defend her with the kind of desperation only someone terrified of losing their status could muster. Victoria wasn't loud in her dislike the way Brittany was, she preferred subtler knives. She'd tilt her head and smile, compliment my simple hairstyle or my refreshingly plain background. She never raised her voice, never lost her temper. She didn't need to. Her words were perfectly aimed, delivered with a softness that made it easy to question whether she meant harm at all. But the moment Ethan stepped out of the room, her tone would shift. Her eyes, hard as glass, would narrow with something dangerously close to disgust. It didn't matter that I was carrying her future grandchild. In her mind, I was unworthy of the Reynolds legacy. And that legacy, as she often liked to say, had to be protected at all costs. There were moments when I wondered if Ethan noticed. He always defended me when he overheard something cruel, but the worst comments came when he wasn't around. He saw only the surface tension, not the foundations of resentment forming beneath it. And because he had grown up with these women, he didn't see the subtle manipulations, the coded insults, the calculating glances. These were normal to him, annoying, yes, but harmless. To me, they were early warnings of a storm gathering strength. Things grew worse after I announced my pregnancy. What should have been the happiest moment of my life became a turning point in the way they treated me. Suddenly, Victoria insisted on planning the baby shower, choosing the nursery decor, scheduling every doctor's appointment. She masked it as help, but I could feel her tightening her grip, trying to secure control over the baby before she was even born. Brittany started posting pictures of baby clothes on her Instagram stories with captions like "for my future niece," positioning herself as the doting aunt to an audience of millions. They weren't becoming kinder, they were becoming strategic. It was during one of those forced family brunches, in a glass-walled sunroom overlooking the vineyards, that Victoria suggested the paternity test. She dropped the suggestion with her usual calm, stirring cream into her coffee as if discussing a new garden project. I was so stunned I nearly dropped my fork. Ethan's reaction was immediate and explosive, but what stayed with me was the expression on Victoria's face as he yelled. She didn't look flustered or apologetic. She looked satisfied, as if she had finally revealed the first layer of what she truly felt. After that day, it became clear that her renewed interest in my life had nothing to do with the baby's well-being. She didn't want a grandchild, she wanted an heir she could control, and she couldn't control me. The tension escalated quietly, disguised beneath family events and holiday gatherings. It was always little things, Brittany making sure I overheard her laughing about my cheap wardrobe, Victoria correcting the way I placed my hands on my belly during a photo, whispers between relatives when they thought I wasn't listening. It was a collection of moments too small to confront individually but too intentional to ignore. Each one chipped away at my patience, at my sense of security, but I held on because Ethan believed in us. He believed in me. And I wasn't ready to let these women take that away. Then came the wedding invitation from Ethan's cousin, a celebration in Charleston that was supposed to mark a fresh start for the family. Nathan was one of the few Reynolds relatives who treated me like a person instead of an inconvenience. I genuinely wanted to be there for him. But when Ethan's business crisis forced him to fly across the world, I should have recognized the danger of walking into a Reynolds event alone. I told myself I could handle it, that I was strong enough, composed enough, brave enough. I had no idea just how far Brittany was willing to go. Looking back, the signs were all there, the clipped tone of her voice when she called to confirm I was attending, the sudden spike in activity on her social media as she hyped up the wedding weekend, the cryptic comment she left on one of my posts, "Big things coming." At the time, I pushed those concerns aside. I was tired of feeling paranoid, tired of second-guessing every motive, tired of assuming the worst simply because the past had given me reasons to. What I didn't know then was that Brittany wasn't just planning to embarrass me, she was planning to break me. To prove to everyone in that ballroom exactly how little she valued me. To show the world that I didn't belong in the Reynolds family and never would. That Charleston weekend wasn't just an event to her, it was a stage. And she was more than willing to turn me into the spectacle. If the Reynolds estate had taught me to expect tension, Charleston taught me to expect war. I should have turned the car around the moment I pulled into the Charleston estate's driveway. Even through the windshield, streaked with early hints of rain, something about the place felt hostile in a way I couldn't explain. The venue was undeniably beautiful, an old plantation house framed by ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss. Its massive columns standing like sentinels guarding generations of Southern wealth. It was the kind of place magazines romanticized, but to me it felt like stepping into a world where expectations were rigid, hierarchies were unspoken, and deviations from the norm were punished with a smile. I parked near a line of sleek black cars and stepped out cautiously, one hand instinctively settling over my 7-month belly as a gust of wind pressed against my dress. I reminded myself that Ethan's cousin, Nathan, was kind. I reminded myself that not everyone in his family wanted me gone. But the moment I crossed the threshold of that mansion, with polished marble floors and crystal chandeliers reflecting back glaring fragments of light, those reassurances evaporated. People turned when I entered, not just glances, but full, lingering looks, traveling from my face to my dress to the undeniable curve of my stomach. Their expressions weren't welcoming. They were praising, assessing, murmuring behind hands that sparkled with diamonds. I caught words like nurse, unexpected, and she looks tired, drifting through the air like perfume laced with poison. I kept moving, shoulders back the way my mother had taught me, refusing to let the burn of humiliation show on my face. I didn't come from money, but that didn't mean I lacked dignity. Then Brittany appeared. She moved toward me with the confidence of someone who believed she owned every room she walked into. Her red gown hugged her figure like it had been sewn directly onto her body, and her smile gleamed for the benefit of the watching crowd. She hooked her arm into mine before I could pull away, her grip uncomfortably tight. "You came," she said. "How brave of you." The words dripped sweetness, but the venom beneath them was unmistakable. She guided me through the crowd like a hostess introducing a novelty act, stopping every few steps to showcase me to her friends. "Everyone, this is Ethan's wife," she announced. "His little charity project." Laughter rippled through the group, soft but sharp enough to cut. I excused myself as quickly as I could and retreated to a quiet corner of the ballroom. The ceremony hadn't begun yet, and I told myself I just needed to endure a few hours, smile politely, and make my exit at the first reasonable opportunity. I sipped water, trying to calm the rising tension in my chest, but every passing minute brought new waves of judgment. I could feel eyes on me, not with curiosity but with expectation, waiting for me to misstep, break decorum, or embarrass myself in some irrecoverable way. When the wedding started, I allowed myself a little relief. The room dimmed, candlelight shimmering across rows of seated guests as Nathan and his bride exchanged vows. For a brief moment, I forgot the hostility surrounding me. The storm outside began to build, thunder rumbling faintly, but in that room, under the soft glow of string lights and floral arrangements, I felt a flicker of hope. Love was love regardless of wealth or pedigree. If Ethan and I had found our way to each other, maybe someday his family would accept that. But hope can be deceitful, especially when enemies smile with perfect lipstick and flawless posture. The reception began with the storm intensifying outside. Lightning flashed across the sky and rain hammered the tall windows of the mansion. Inside, though, everything remained polished, champagne flutes clinking, laughter rising above the music, waiters weaving through crowds with trays of hors d'oeuvres. I stayed mostly at my table, not wanting to tempt another encounter with Brittany, but I couldn't ignore the catering staff struggling around me. Their team was clearly shorthanded. They were dropping utensils, rushing to refill water glasses, and trying to keep up with demanding guests. My instincts as a nurse kicked in automatically. I couldn't sit there and watch people drown in work, even if it wasn't my place. So I stood and began helping, quietly collecting plates, moving empty glasses aside, offering a hand wherever needed. It wasn't a performance. It was habit. But I didn't realize that Brittany had seen me until her voice echoed across the ballroom like a spotlight snapping on. "Look at this, everyone," she announced. "The billionaire's wife is working as a servant." Conversations halted, heads turned, dozens of phones came out. I froze, a tray of empty glasses in my hands, heat rushing up my neck. Brittany strutted toward me, smirking. "I suppose once a waitress, always a waitress," she said. "Does Ethan know you were here embarrassing him?" I set the tray down carefully, refusing to let it crash to the floor the way my pride was crashing inside me. "I was just trying to help," I said softly. "Oh, of course you were," she replied with mock sympathy, raising her voice so the entire room could hear. "That's what your kind does, right? Serve your betters." More laughter, more cameras, more humiliation than I'd felt in my entire life. I tried to walk away, but Brittany grabbed my arm, nails digging into my skin. She leaned close, her breath warm against my ear. "I'm going to make sure Ethan sees exactly what kind of trash he married." And then she set the stage for the moment she'd clearly been planning. It happened so fast I barely had time to panic. A leak near the entrance had forced staff to place several buckets under a dripping roofline, each one filled with murky rainwater mixed with dirt from outside. Brittany walked toward them deliberately, heels clicking on the marble floor. She didn't have to speak, the guests knew something was coming. They gathered, hungry for entertainment at my expense. When Brittany lifted the bucket, my heart thudded painfully against my ribs. "No," I whispered. "Brittany, please, I'm pregnant." "You should have thought of that before you wormed your way into this family," she snapped. She threw the water. It crashed over me like a tidal wave, cold, filthy, shocking. Mud streaked down my face, clinging to my dress, soaking through to my skin. Gasps erupted, followed by laughter that seemed to swallow the entire room. Phones rose higher, capturing every second. I tasted bitterness in my mouth, part rainwater, part humiliation. Someone shouted, "Did you get that on video?" As if I were a circus act, not a human being carrying a child. Before I could even push the drenched hair from my eyes, two of Brittany's friends seized my arms. Their perfect nails dug into my skin as they dragged me toward the entrance. I begged them to stop. I begged them to think about the baby. But cruelty doesn't pause for mercy. They shoved me out into the storm. Rain beat down on me hard enough to sting. I stumbled, landing on my knees in the muddy driveway. When I turned back, the heavy wooden doors slammed shut, sealing me out as if I were contagion. I pounded on them, calling for help, calling for anyone to show a shred of humanity. Inside, the music resumed. Laughter resumed. My existence, my safety, my pregnancy, none of it mattered to them. Standing there, soaked and shaking, I realized something painful but true. This wasn't a misunderstanding, a moment of poor judgment, or the exaggerated cruelty of privileged people seeking amusement. This was intentional. This was planned. Brittany hadn't acted on impulses. She had orchestrated a spectacle designed to humiliate me into submission. And if Ethan hadn't arrived when he did, I truly don't know how far they would have gone. When Ethan burst through the doors of that Charleston mansion, soaked from the storm and frantic in a way I had never seen, the entire atmosphere of the ballroom shifted. Moments earlier, the guests were reveling in my humiliation with the easy comfort of people who believed themselves superior. People who thought consequences were problems reserved for others. But when Ethan stepped inside carrying the weight of fury in every line of his body, their expressions changed. Laughter withered into stiff silence. Phones lowered. Even Brittany, who had been basking in the attention of her cruel spectacle, instinctively stepped back. She knew she had crossed a line, but she had no idea just how far that line extended. Ethan moved like a man walking into a battlefield, rain dripping from his hair, his suit clinging to him, his shoes leaving muddy prints across the marble floor. He didn't seem to notice any of it. His focus was locked on me, shivering, drenched, trembling beside him, and the moment our eyes met, something inside him snapped. He wrapped his arm around me, pulling me close as if trying to shield me from the very room we stood in. Then he lifted his head and surveyed the crowd with a gaze so cold and controlled it sent ripples of fear through people who had never been held accountable in their lives. Someone, he said, voice steady but carrying dangerously through the room, is going to explain why my pregnant wife was standing in a storm. No one spoke, not a single person. The same guests who had shouted, laughed, and filmed me moments earlier now stared at Ethan like they'd never seen him before. Maybe they hadn't. People often mistake kindness for weakness, gentleness for softness. They forget that the quietest men can erupt like tornadoes when someone they love is hurt. And Ethan loved me. That love radiated off him in ways too intense to ignore. He turned to me, softened only for a breath. Tell me what happened. I did. My voice shook, my hands trembled. But I told him everything, from Brittany recording me as I helped the catering staff to her insults, to the bucket of filthy rainwater crashing over me, to the moment I was shoved outside and left in the storm. As I spoke, the tension in his jaw grew sharper, the crease between his brows deeper. He wasn't reacting outwardly. That would have been easier for everyone in the room. No, Ethan processed anger differently. He let it sink in slowly, saturating every thought until the only thing left was resolve. When I finished, he turned his gaze on Brittany. Step forward. She froze, her mascara, once perfect, smudged slightly from the humidity. She looked nothing like the confident influencer who had commanded the room minutes earlier. Now she looked like someone cornered, uncertain, exposed. Ethan, please, she said, taking a shaky breath, you don't understand. Step forward. This time his voice thundered through the ballroom. Brittany jumped as if struck, then stumbled a few steps toward us. She clasped her shaking hands together, mouth opening and closing as she tried to form an excuse, but Ethan didn't give her the chance. What you did to Claire wasn't a joke, he said. It wasn't misconduct, it was cruelty. Malicious, deliberate cruelty. He took out his phone, and Brittany's eyes widened with dawning panic. And now you were gonna learn what actions like that cost. He made the first call in front of the entire wedding party, speaking clearly, professionally, ruthlessly. This is Ethan Reynolds, effective immediately. Remove Brittany Reynolds from her position at Reynolds Tech. Terminate all access credentials. Cancel every corporate account linked to her name. A collective gasp moved through the room. The second call came before Brittany could even process the first. The penthouse on Riverside, terminate her lease. She has 48 hours to vacate. Security will oversee her departure. Her legs buckled. She dropped to her knees on the polished marble, palms flat against the floor as if trying to steady herself. Tears welled, but Ethan didn't waver. Ethan, no, please, please, she sobbed. It was a stupid prank. I didn't mean. You humiliated my wife, he said. You endangered her, you endangered my child, and you did it for entertainment. He addressed the room then, sweeping his gaze across the sea of guilty, frightened faces. And the rest of you, he continued, everyone who laughed, everyone who recorded, everyone who stood by and let this happen. You showed me exactly who you are. A few people looked down at their feet. Others shifted uncomfortably. No one dared speak. If you work for any Reynolds company, your positions are under review. If you receive funding, partnership benefits, grants, or sponsorship from our family trust, consider those relationships conditional moving forward. Disrespecting my wife is disrespecting me. Victoria, who had watched from the bar with an expression that flickered between irritation and shock, finally stepped forward. She moved slowly, controlled as always, her voice soft and soothing, the way she spoke to donors and politicians. Ethan, she said, you're overreacting. This is unnecessary. Brittany made a mistake, yes, but she is family. She didn't intend. Don't, he said sharply, eyes narrowing. Don't insult me by pretending this was harmless. And don't call her family as if that word excuses anything. Brittany sobbed harder. Victoria tried again. She's your sister. Stepsister, he corrected, and Claire is my wife, my partner, the mother of my child. There is no one in this room whose status outweighs her safety. There it was, the line drawn cleanly, irrevocably. For years, Victoria had controlled narratives, manipulated optics, curated the Reynolds image with an iron will hidden beneath couture fabrics. But now, in front of nearly 200 guests, Ethan publicly tore down the hierarchy she had spent decades constructing. And then he made the final call. 2 security guards entered at his request, large, stoic men hired for high-profile events. "Escort Brittany Reynolds outside," he said calmly. Through the same door she pushed my wife through. The room erupted not with sound but with stunned disbelief. Even the storm outside seemed to pause. Brittany screamed as the guards helped her up. "Ethan, you can't do this!" "You can't throw me out into that storm." But he had already turned away, done with her, done with listening, done with pretending that the Reynolds family had any claim to virtue. A moment later, the side doors swung open again. Rain and wind blasted in, spraying across the polished floor. Brittany was pushed outside, the storm swallowing her as the doors slammed shut behind her. I saw her through the glass-drenched shaking, pounding on the same door I had pounded on earlier. No one moved to let her in. The symmetry of the moment should have felt satisfying, but instead it hollowed something inside me. For the first time, I realized what it meant to be on the wrong side of the Reynolds' power. It didn't just cut down enemies, it obliterated them. Ethan wrapped his arm around me again, shielding me from the dozens of eyes still watching. "We were leaving," he said softly, voice steady now, gentler. "I'm taking you home." And in that moment I believed the worst was behind us. I didn't yet understand that Brittany had never been the real threat. Victoria was. And she was just beginning. The days following the Charleston incident should have been a time of slow healing. A chance for my body and mind to recover from the shock of being shoved into a storm while 7 months pregnant. Ethan stayed by my side, almost afraid to leave me for even a moment, as if stepping away meant the world might collapse again. And in a way it already had. The betrayal at that wedding had shaken me to my core, not just because of what Brittany did, but because so many people watched and chose to enjoy the spectacle rather than intervene. I had known I didn't belong in the Reynolds family, but I hadn't realized how deeply they resented my presence until that night. Still, for a brief period, our home in San Francisco became a sanctuary. Ethan canceled meetings, ignored calls from investors, and shut down any discussions involving strategies for the viral footage. He didn't want to talk about optics or damage control. He wanted to care for me. He made soups the way my mother had taught me, brought warm washcloths, rubbed my back when the tension from the trauma made my muscles seize. He apologized so many times I eventually had to take his face in my hands and tell him to stop. None of this was his doing. He hadn't known what Brittany was capable of. He hadn't known how far she would go. But Victoria had. That truth lingered in the back of my mind, slipping into my thoughts like a shadow that refused to be ignored. At the wedding, she had watched from the sidelines, sipping champagne, never intervening, never showing concern. She had acted surprised when Ethan confronted Brittany, but her expression wasn't shock, it was calculation. I sensed it even then, but I pushed it aside because I was so exhausted and grateful to be home again. 3 days after the storm incident, the media frenzy intensified. Videos of Brittany throwing the bucket had gone viral, and public outrage slammed down on her like a hammer. Influencers who once for her attention suddenly unfollowed, brands quietly cut ties, her comment sections turned from praise to condemnation. I should have felt vindicated, but all I felt was drained. Pain doesn't disappear just because people believe you. Trauma doesn't evaporate because strangers on the internet take your side. Then the second wave hit. It came in the morning, just as I was trying to enjoy a cup of tea while sitting under a blanket on the couch. My phone buzzed once, then again, then an avalanche of notifications poured in, texts from coworkers, friends, distant relatives, people I hadn't spoken to in years. Ethan walked into the room still half asleep and froze when he saw my expression. "What's wrong?" he asked. I turned my phone toward him. There, plastered across the top of a major tabloid, was a headline so outrageous I felt my lungs twist. Billionaire's wife exposed, shocking past as stripper and addict revealed. My heart lurched. I opened the article, my hands trembling so violently I nearly dropped the phone. It was filled with fabricated stories, doctored photos placing my face on bodies that weren't mine, quotes from anonymous coworkers describing me as manipulative, unstable, dishonest. Every lie was crafted to destroy not just my reputation but my credibility, my character, my entire identity. Ethan snatched the phone, reading with growing horror. "This is garbage," he muttered, "absolute garbage." But the damage was already spreading. Several hospitals I'd worked released statements distancing themselves from me. My nursing license board reached out for clarification on allegations. Former patients messaged me asking whether any of it was true. Even my mother left a voicemail. her voice cracking as she begged me to tell her it was all fabricated. It felt like drowning, only slower and more suffocating. Ethan immediately called lawyers, firms, crisis specialists, anyone who could help contain the firestorm. But I couldn't stop thinking about the photos included in the article, particularly the ones from my first dinner with the Reynolds family. Those images had never been public. Only someone inside the estate could have provided them, someone with access, someone who had been present. And there was only one person who made sense. Victoria. The moment that realization crystallized, my stomach churned. Brittany's cruelty had been emotional and impulsive, the type of malice fueled by jealousy and insecurity. But this was strategic. This was the work of someone who understood money, influence, and the art of destruction. Someone who knew how to make a lie believable by blending it with the right amount of truth. Someone who had the resources to hire an image manipulation firm and plant stories with journalists who valued scandal more than integrity. Victoria didn't want to humiliate me. She wanted to erase me. She wanted to sever me from Ethan, discredit me socially, professionally, and personally. And worst of all, she wanted to do it while smiling sweetly and claiming she had no idea how any of it happened. That same afternoon, the doorbell rang. Ethan was in his office on a conference call with attorneys, so I opened the door. There, holding a massive bouquet of white lilies, stood Victoria Reynolds, dressed impeccably in a soft gray coat. Her face arranged into an expression of sorrow so polished it could have won an award. "Claire," she breathed, "sweetheart, I came as soon as I saw the news." Every instinct screamed for me to shut the door, but I hesitated. I was raised to be polite, even to people who didn't deserve it. "May I come in?" she asked, placing a hand over her heart. "I need to apologize." "Apologize?" Ethan's mother or stepmother technically sat on my couch, dabbing delicately at her eyes while telling me how ashamed she was of Brittany, how devastated she was by what happened in Charleston, how much she respected me for handling everything with grace. She never mentioned the smear campaign, not once. Instead, she subtly shifted blame, threaded with compliments designed to make me lower my guard. "You're such a gentle soul," she said, "so forgiving, too forgiving perhaps. This family is complicated, it takes time to understand us." I watched her, studying every flicker of her expression, every carefully chosen word. Victoria was not a woman of emotion. She was a strategist. Everything she said had purpose. Everything she did had motive. And yet she sat there pretending she wanted peace. When she finally left, leaving the lilies behind, I stared at the flowers. They were pristine, elegant, and almost suffocating in their scent. Too perfect. Too staged. Just like her apology. My mother once told me that when a person apologizes too easily, you should focus on what their hands are doing, not their mouth. And Victoria's hands were spotless, no tremble, no hesitation, no remorse. She wasn't apologizing. She was checking whether her attack had worked. Later that night, as Ethan held me close and whispered that we would get through this, I realized something painful but empowering. Victoria thought she could break me. She had no idea who she was dealing with. The morning after Victoria's curated apology, I woke with a fire in my chest that I hadn't felt in weeks. Fear had been sitting heavy on my shoulders, exhaustion clinging to my bones, grief tightening around my ribs. But now something sharper had replaced it: determination. The smear campaign had taken things from me, my reputation, my sense of safety, my trust in the world around me. But it hadn't taken my clarity. The lies in that article weren't random or sloppy. They were too coordinated, too polished, too expensive. They came from someone who had access, someone who knew exactly which parts of my life to exploit. And the only person with motive, resources. And that level of access was the same woman who had sat on my couch the day before pretending to care. Victoria hadn't simply tried to embarrass me. She had tried to erase me from Ethan's life permanently. And now that the humiliation of Charleston hadn't worked, she had moved to stage 2 character assassination. So I called someone who understood how to uncover rot beneath polished floors. Patricia Hayes, a former detective who now specialized in private investigations. Patricia carried herself with the confidence of someone who had spent decades navigating crime scenes, interrogation rooms, and bureaucratic red tape. When she stepped into my living room, she didn't waste time on small talk. She took one look at the tabloids sprawled across my coffee table, then looked up at me. "All right," she said, "tell me everything." So I did. I told her about the wedding, the bucket of dirty water, the locked door, the viral videos. I told her about Victoria's sudden interest in my pregnancy, the paternity test suggestion, the subtleties of her insults. I told her about Brittany's cruelty, the apology that had felt rehearsed, the timing of the smear article, the suspiciously professional editing on the fake photos. And I told her about the ruined dinner picture included in the hit piece, one only the Reynolds household could have accessed. Patricia listened without interrupting, but her pen moved quickly across her notepad. When I finished, she tapped her pen once and leaned back. This wasn't done by a tabloid digging through trash cans. She said this was hired work, and not cheap hired work. Someone spent real money. Victoria, I whispered. Patricia didn't confirm, but she didn't dismiss it either. I'll need access to anything you can provide, emails, messages, your schedule from the day the photos were taken. Any unusual activity in the house before the article dropped. And more importantly, she added, I need someone inside that estate. That was when I realized exactly who could help. Dolly. For years, she had been the quiet heartbeat of the Reynolds household, the kind of woman people underestimated, because she blended into the background. But I remembered her warning from my first visit to Napa, nice women don't last long in this house. She had seen things, heard things, and something in her eyes told me she had never forgotten any of it. I drove to the Napier estate with my pulse pounding. The main house looked peaceful from the outside, framed by vineyards and rolling hills. But beneath the calm exterior was a family that fed on control. Stepping into that environment without Ethan by my side should have terrified me. Instead, I felt calm, almost eerily calm. Because for the first time since the wedding, I wasn't walking in there hoping they would accept me. I was walking in there gathering what I needed to fight back. I found Dolly in the kitchen polishing silver as she always did. When she saw me, her eyes softened, but she closed the distance quickly, pulling me into a hug that smelled like lemon polish and home. Mrs. Clare, she murmured, you shouldn't be here, not with everything going on. I need your help, I said, my voice steady. She pulled back enough to search my face. Help with what? With the truth. I know what Victoria did. I know she's behind the story. I need proof. Dolly didn't look surprised. She didn't gasp or deny it. She simply sighed, the kind of sigh that comes from years of witnessing ugliness behind closed doors. I figured this day would come, she said finally. Follow me. She led me to a small pantry closet, opened a cabinet I had never paid attention to, and pulled out a thick leather-bound journal. The edges were worn, the corners creased, the pages filled with dense handwriting. I've kept track of everything, she said, for 15 years. Why? I whispered. Because in this house, the truth gets buried under money and charm unless someone keeps a record. Someone who doesn't benefit from their power. When I lifted the journal, it felt heavier than paper should. As I flipped through the pages, I saw dates, overheard conversations, suspicious transaction receipts Dolly had found discarded, unusual visitor logs. Internal disputes within the family trust, notes about Victoria's late night phone calls, Brittany's tantrums. Even references to a consultant hired after Ethan married me. This, I said breathlessly, is enough to burn this house down. It's enough to reveal who built it on lies, Dolly corrected. We exchanged a long look. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about a corruption that had seeped into the Reynolds family long before I arrived. But Victoria wasn't the only one I needed information from. There was another person in the house who knew more than anyone else. Henry Reynolds. The family treated him as if he were fading, a fragile old man in a wheelchair who barely recognized people. But I had seen something, brief moments of clarity in his eyes, a sharpness he hid beneath the facade of confusion, and Dolly confirmed it. Mr. Henry, she said, lowering her voice, knows far more than he lets on. Victoria prefers people think he's lost, keeps him harmless, keeps him quiet. I found him in his usual spot in the east wing, staring out at the vineyard. His nurse scrolled on her phone, not paying attention. When she stepped away to take a call, I sat beside him and gently placed the journal on his lap. I know you understand more than they think, I said, and I know Victoria is behind the lies about me. I need your help. For a moment he didn't react. Then he reached into his pocket with a trembling hand and pulled out a small brass key. When he placed it into my palm, his voice came out low, gravelly, and shockingly clear. Third floor study, he said, behind the painting of the hunting dogs, the safe. Everything you were looking for is inside. My breath hitched. Proof, real proof. The kind Victoria couldn't bury. The kind that could end this. As Henry's gaze drifted back to the window, his voice softened just enough for me to catch his final words. Take it and be careful, storms don't end just because the rain stops. The brass key Henry placed in my hand felt heavier than metal. It felt like responsibility, like warning, like the kind of truth that could shatter an entire dynasty if revealed. I slipped it into my pocket and thanked him softly, though he had already drifted back into the slow, distant stare he wore whenever others were around. Whether it was an act or his mind slipping in and out of clarity, I didn't know. But one thing was certain, he had chosen to be lucid for me. That alone made my pulse race with a mix of hope and fear. If Henry had been gathering evidence for years, silently witnessing the corruption in his own family, then what lay behind that painting on the third floor wasn't just incriminating, it was dangerous. I waited until evening to make my move. The Naples estate was expansive enough that slipping away went unnoticed, especially when Victoria was busy entertaining guests in her favorite lounge. She thrived on attention, hosting small gatherings even on weekdays, filling the house with the sound of clinking glasses and curated laughter. Tonight was no exception. The sound of her voice carried down the hall, buoyant and charming as she recounted some exaggerated story meant to flatter herself. The perfect distraction. I walked quietly through the mansion's east corridor, my footsteps soundless on the carpeted floors. The third-floor staircase creaked faintly under my weight, but no one seemed to hear. When I reached the top landing, a cold shiver rolled across my skin. The hall was dim, the sconce lights flickering the way old houses sometimes do, casting strange shadows that made the framed portraits feel alive. The painting Henry mentioned, a hunting scene featuring 2 dogs and a rider, hung alone on a section of wall that looked too clean, too untouched compared to the surrounding art. It was almost as if the family avoided it, or perhaps Victoria preferred guests not linger near something she wanted hidden. I pressed my hands against the frame and pushed. It didn't budge. Then I gripped the edges and lifted. The painting slid upward on concealed rails, revealing a steel safe embedded into the wall. Its surface was scratched and worn, clearly older than most of the modernized rooms in the house. I inserted the brass key into the lock, my heart pounding so loud I worried the staff downstairs would hear it. A soft click echoed down the hall, and the safe swung open. Inside was a treasure trove of secrets. Stacks of documents stuffed into folders, USB drives labeled with dates, hard copies of bank transfers, handwritten letters, entire binders filled with spreadsheets and meeting notes. It was the kind of meticulous record that only someone deeply betrayed would take the time to compile. Henry hadn't simply suspected Victoria, he had watched her, tracked her, spent years collecting evidence that could destroy her if placed in the right hands. As I pulled the first binder out, dust floated into the air, shimmering in the dim light. I sat on the floor and flipped through it. The earliest entries were simple, small inconsistencies within the family trust, minor withdrawals disguised as business expenses, invoices billed to non-existent vendors. But over the years the amounts increased. 5,000 became 10, 10 became 50. Before long, Victoria was siphoning hundreds of thousands into offshore accounts under shell companies. $8 million in total. No wonder she wanted me gone. As long as I was part of Ethan's life, especially now that I was carrying the next legitimate heir, I posed a threat to every secret she'd buried. Ethan was smart, and if he ever noticed the discrepancies, he wouldn't stop until he uncovered everything. Victoria needed me removed permanently, either through humiliation, divorce, or utter destruction of my credibility. To her, I wasn't just inconvenient, I was dangerous. I scanned the rest of the safe contents, finding more than just financial manipulation. There were correspondences with a firm known for digital sabotage, contracts under false names, even transcripts of conversations, possibly obtained illegally, that outlined her attempts to weaken other members of the family board. She had built an empire of lies, one that could only thrive if everyone believed her facade of elegance and stability. A floorboard creaked behind me. I froze, every muscle tensing. I slid the binder back into the safe and pushed the door nearly shut, leaving only a narrow gap so I could reopen it instantly if needed. Footsteps approached, slow, deliberate, coming from the far end of the corridor. I extinguished the small wall lamp beside me, plunging the hallway into deeper dimness. My breath hitched as the figure approached. It wasn't Victoria. It was Dolly. She exhaled with relief when she spotted me. "You shouldn't be up here alone," she whispered, hurrying toward me. "If Victoria catches you near this room, she won't let you leave without knowing what you've seen." I had to come, I whispered back. "Henry told me there was proof." She nodded. "Proof that will bury her, but be careful. That woman didn't get where she is by being careless. She checks things. Looks for shifts in routine, notices when something's been moved." Her eyes flicked to the slightly ajar safe door, and she grimaced. "We have to move quickly." Together, we gathered as much as we could. I took photos with my phone of the most damning documents, making sure to capture dates, signatures, wire transfer numbers. Dolly helped identify which files mattered most and which were red herrings. In just 20 minutes, my phone held enough evidence to destroy Victoria's entire curated empire. But we couldn't take the physical documents, not yet. Taking them would alert her immediately. For now, I needed copies, leverage, a way to strike when she least expected it. We closed the safe, lowered the painting, and started down the hall. But before we reached the staircase, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. Victoria's voice. She was speaking to someone, her lawyer, from the tone of her crisp, controlled words. As she climbed the stairs, each heel click echoed like a countdown. Dolly grabbed my wrist, pulling me into a side hallway, and we tucked ourselves behind a tall, decorative cabinet. Victoria reached the landing milliseconds later. She stopped. Her heels pivoted on the hardwood slowly. She looked down the corridor toward the portrait of the hunting dogs. My heart pounded so violently I worried she might hear it. But after a moment, she turned away, her focus shifting to whatever call she was on. She walked past, descending back down the stairs with an air of confidence that made my skin crawl. Only when she was out of sight did Dolly release my hand. That was close, she breathed. Too close, I whispered. But something inside me had changed. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I wasn't hiding or hoping this would resolve itself. Now I had knowledge, now I had proof, now I understood the true scale of what Victoria had done. She had tried to ruin my life. Now I was going to dismantle her empire. And I wouldn't stop until every lie she'd built came crumbling down. By the time the night of the Napa Valley Gala arrived, I had rehearsed my plan 100 times in my head. Every breath, every step, every word I would say had been sharpened by days of preparation, waves of fear, and a resolve that grew stronger with each passing hour. The evidence I'd uncovered with Dolly and Henry wasn't just powerful, it was explosive. $8 million hidden in shell accounts. Fraud layered beneath charity work. Digital contracts linking Victoria to the smear campaign that nearly destroyed my career. Emails that exposed her manipulation of board members. It was enough to ruin her socially, financially, and legally. The tricky part wasn't collecting it, it was deploying it at the exact moment that would prevent her from burying it again. And nothing was more public, more symbolic, or more beautifully ironic than taking her down at her own beloved gala. The annual Reynolds Foundation winter benefit was her kingdom. She spent months curating every detail, floral arrangements imported from Europe, a menu designed by Michelin-star chefs, glass sculptures commissioned from New York, a guest list that read like a directory of the top 1%. Everyone who mattered in her world would be there. So would the press. And tonight, for the first time since the smear story broke, I would be seen in public again. Which was precisely what she wanted. She believed I would stay home, hide, shrink, disappear. Instead, I stepped out of the car in a midnight blue gown that framed my pregnancy instead of disguising it. Guests turned to look. Conversations paused, the string quartet faltered for a beat. Every eye reeled toward me with a mix of shock, curiosity, and discomfort. I could feel their questions hanging in the air. Why is she here? Isn't she embarrassed? Didn't she ruin the family's reputation? Let them wonder. Tonight I wasn't here to prove myself. I was here to end the reign of the woman who had tried to destroy me. Victoria stood near the stage, surrounded by admirers. She wore an ivory gown that shimmered like polished bone, her hair in an elegant twist, her smile effortlessly poised. When she saw me, something fractured in her expression only for a moment, but I caught it. It was surprise, and irritation, and fear buried deeper than any of her diamonds could conceal. She glided toward me with the grace of a queen accustomed to kneeling subjects. "Claire," she said, voice warm and smooth, "what a brave decision to come. I suppose even the wounded want a spotlight now and then." The comment stung, but not enough to break my composure. "Thank you for the invitation," I replied. "I wouldn't have missed it." Her smile flickered. She expected tears, quivering vulnerability, discomfort. Instead, she found steel. That unbalanced her more than any scandal ever could. Ethan arrived moments later, pulling me into a gentle embrace and whispering, "You look incredible." He had no idea what I planned, and part of me wished I could have told him. But this wasn't something I wanted him to protect me from. This was something I needed to do myself. The evening unfolded with practiced elegant small talk, champagne toasts, donors flashing their generosity with every stylized pen stroke on pledge cards. But beneath the glittering surface, tension coiled around my spine, winding tighter each minute. I could feel Victoria's gaze shadowing me, circling like a predator waiting for weakness. I didn't give her any. Instead, I waited. The moment came just after dinner, when Victoria stepped onto the stage to give her annual speech. Cameras swung toward her, broadcast crews adjusted their angles, reporters raised microphones. She lived for this moment. The applause washed over her like worship. Her voice spilled through the speakers with the confidence of a woman who had built her life on admiration and manipulation. "Tonight," she said, "we celebrate the generosity that defines the Reynolds legacy." I stepped forward. At first, no one noticed, then a few turned their heads, whispered, pointed. Ethan caught sight of me moving toward the stage and stiffened. "Claire," he murmured, reaching for my hand. but I was already climbing the steps. Victoria faltered mid-sentence as I approached the podium. A ripple of unease traveled through the crowd. For the first time all night, her mask cracked. "This is highly inappropriate," she whispered through clenched teeth. "No," I said softly, tapping the microphone, letting the sound echo across the room. "What you did to me was inappropriate. This is overdue." The silence that followed was so complete it felt like the air had frozen. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the projection system. Screens lit up across the ballroom floor to ceiling displays reflecting documents, bank transfers, emails, digital signatures. Victoria's face drained of color as her secrets spilled across the room in real time. "This," I began, my voice steady, "is evidence of $8 million embezzled from the Reynolds Foundation Trust over the past 15 years. Gasps exploded across the room. "And this," I continued, swiping to the next slide, "is a contract between Victoria Reynolds and a reputation management firm hired to fabricate a smear campaign against me, complete with doctored images, false statements, and targeted harassment." Someone dropped a glass. The shatter echoed like punctuation. Ethan looked at the screen, then at his stepmother, horror widening his eyes. He stepped closer to me, protective instinct igniting, but he let me continue. "Here are internal emails directing funds to offshore accounts," I said. "And here, labeled under a false corporate entity, are payments sent directly to the authors of the defamatory articles that almost cost me my nursing license." People stared at Victoria now, not with admiration but revulsion. She grabbed the microphone. "This is all fabricated," she insisted, voice wavering. She clearly manipulated. "Sit down," Ethan said, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the room. She froze. He had never spoken to her that way before, and everyone knew it. I turned back to the crowd. I didn't come here for sympathy. I didn't come here to reclaim my reputation. I came to expose the truth and to protect my daughter from growing up in a family built on deception. The screens continued to scroll through evidence, the kind no amount of money could bury now that it had been made public in front of hundreds of witnesses. Reporters captured every second, guests recorded everything. Victoria's empire, the one she built on manipulation, was collapsing in real time. When I finished, I shut off the screen and stepped back. Victoria lunged toward me, her face twisted with rage. "You little—" Security intercepted her before she could reach me. She struggled, hissed, then screamed a raw, ugly sound that stripped away every ounce of her refined exterior. "You think you've won?" she spat. "You think he'll still want you after everything you've brought on this family? You re nothing." Ethan stepped between us, his voice calm but lethal. "The only person who brought shame on this family is you." Gasps swept the room again. Victoria's face crumpled as she realized the truth. Her reign was over, and I was the one who ended it. As the officers escorted her toward the exit, her heels scraping across the marble floor like defeated drumbeats, I finally let myself breathe. For the first time since I joined the Reynolds family, I wasn't defending myself. I was standing my ground. And I wasn't done yet. The hours after the gala felt unreal, as if the night had split my life into two separate timelines, one where I had been powerless against the Reynolds family, and another where I finally claimed control. Yet reality came rushing back the moment the flashing lights of police cars and news vans faded from the estate's driveway. The exhaustion hit next, hard and overwhelming, followed by a tension so tight across my abdomen it stopped me mid-step. Ethan noticed immediately, his arms circling me in a way that was both protective and terrified. He didn't speak at first, didn't ask questions. He simply guided me to the car with the urgent gentleness of someone who had nearly lost too much already. Once inside, he cupped my face with both hands. "You should have told me," he said, his voice rough with worry. "I would have stood beside you." "I needed to do it myself," I whispered. "She wanted me to disappear. I wasn't going to let her win." His eyes softened with pride, but the worry never left. As we drove away from the estate, headlights cutting through the darkness of Napa Valley's winding roads, I rested a hand over my stomach. The baby shifted beneath my palm, a reminder that every decision I made wasn't mine alone anymore. The adrenaline of the gala had carried me through the confrontation, but now the emotional weight returned with force. My body trembled. My breath shortened. Ethan reached over, squeezing my hand as if he feared I might slip away if he let go. Halfway to the hospital in Sacramento, a strong tightening shot through my abdomen. I gasped, bracing against the seat. Ethan swerved slightly, panic flaring in his eyes. "Claire," he breathed, "is it?" "I don't know," I said, gripping the door handle as another wave rolled through me. "It might be early labor." He pressed harder on the gas, calling ahead to the hospital with one hand while keeping the other firmly on mine. The concern in his voice cut through every noise on the line. He wasn't the composed CO tonight. He wasn't the man the business world feared. He was a husband terrified for his family. When we reached the emergency room, nurses rushed forward with a wheelchair. The fluorescent lights overhead blurred as they guided me through the corridors, asking questions I struggled to answer. How long had the contractions been happening? Was there bleeding? Any loss of fluid? I shook my head through most of them, until one question made my chest tighten. Have you experienced significant physical or emotional stress recently? I let out a laugh that sounded closer to a sob, you could say that. They didn't push for clarification, they didn't need to. My heart rate was too fast, my anxiety too high. Stress was written across every line of my face, every tremor in my voice. Ethan followed closely, refusing to leave my side even when the nurses ushered him back behind a temporary divider. His hand stayed on my shoulder, tense and steady. A doctor examined me quickly. You re-experiencing preterm contractions, she said. We were going to try to stop them, but we need to monitor both you and the baby. Her tone was calm, clinical, but beneath it lingered the unmistakable concern of someone who knew the risks. I nodded, swallowing hard, trying not to let fear climb too far up my throat. Ethan leaned beside the bed, his forehead against mine. You're safe, he whispered. I'm here, I'm not going anywhere. Even in pain, I felt the truth in his words. He wasn't the man who had blindly defended his family anymore. The truth I revealed at the gala had cut him deeply, not because of what Victoria did to me, but because of what she had done to him. To their legacy. To the foundation he had spent years trying to build with integrity. Hours passed in a blur of medication, warm blankets, soft-voiced nurses, and beeping monitors. The contractions slowed, then eased, until the pain settled into something manageable, no longer sharp enough to steal my breath. Relief washed through me, but it was fragile. The night had shaken more than my body, it had shaken the future I was trying to protect. When the doctor finally stepped back in and confirmed that the labor had been halted, Ethan exhaled a breath he had been holding since the moment the first contraction hit. He pressed his head into my lap, his shoulders shaking with relief he didn't try to hide. I stroked his hair, my own eyes filling. We were okay, I whispered, we were okay. But that wasn't entirely true. The fallout from the gala had already begun. The moment the scandal broke publicly, the Reynolds Foundation board launched an emergency meeting. By early morning, Victoria was removed from every leadership position she held. Her accounts were frozen pending investigation. Her involvement in the smear campaign had triggered a deeper audit into every business she touched. The police, having received copies of the documents I exposed, had begun combing through the offshore transfers. What I had revealed didn't just tarnish Victoria's reputation. It placed her in direct legal jeopardy. But she wasn't the only one facing consequences. Brittany, still reeling from her public humiliation and earlier punishment, had uploaded a video to social media. In it, she tearfully apologized not to me, but to her followers and sponsors for letting emotions get the best of her. Yet even through the shaky filter, she placed blame sideways, implying I had provoked her, that I had come into the family with an attitude. That I had made the gala into something ugly because I couldn't handle pressure. The internet didn't buy it. By sunrise, she had lost 2 major brand partnerships and her follower count was plummeting by the minute. Meanwhile, Ethan's phone rang nonstop. Board members, attorneys, journalists, extended family, all of them scrambling to handle the impact of the scandal. But Ethan ignored nearly all of them. Instead, he sat beside my bed, fingers hooked with mine, refusing to be anywhere else. Around mid-morning, he finally broke the silence. Claire, he said softly, I'm so sorry for all of it. For not seeing sooner, for not protecting you from what they are. You protected me, I said, in Charleston, and tonight here. He shook his head. Not enough, not from the deeper things, his voice cracked. I let you walk into that house alone for months thinking you didn't deserve better. But you did, you do. I touched his cheek, brushing away the tear he didn't bother to hide. We're here now, I said, we survived it, that matters. He kissed my forehead, lingering there for several seconds. I'm done letting them steer this family, he whispered. From now on, I decide what the Reynolds legacy is. And you're at the center of it. A lump rose in my throat, born from the kind of love that grows stronger under pressure instead of breaking apart. Still, beneath the quiet tenderness of that moment, a darker truth hovered. Victoria had been exposed, but people like her didn't crumble quietly. She would fight, she would retaliate. She would try to savage whatever power remained in her grasp. And I had a feeling she wouldn't come after me first. She would come after Ethan. And this time, I wasn't going to wait for her to strike. I was going to be ready. The week after the gala felt like standing on shifting ground. Every morning brought new headlines, new investigations, new statements from the Reynolds board and the district attorney's office. Victoria's empire of polished lies had begun to crack open under public scrutiny, And once the cracks formed, the entire structure began collapsing faster than anyone expected. Investigators found offshore accounts exactly where Henry's notes indicated. Her digital signature appeared on contracts linked to the smear campaign. Even some of her closest allies' board members who had benefited from her influence began turning on her to protect themselves. The woman who had once controlled rooms with a smile now found herself drowning in evidence she couldn't explain away. But as the legal world circled around her, my world had shrunk to the quiet sterility of a hospital room. Doctors insisted on keeping me under observation for several days. Stress, they said, could trigger another round of contractions if I wasn't careful. Ethan stayed with me almost constantly. The only time he stepped out was to take calls from attorneys or handle board matters that couldn't be ignored. Whenever he returned, he brought me updates, small pieces of reassurance, careful promises that the storm outside wouldn't reach us again. But storms are persistent things. 2 days in my hospital stay around 9 p.m. Ethan stepped out to speak with a detective who had arrived to collect an additional statement. I was alone, propped up against a stack of pillows, the lights dimmed. The rhythmic beeps of the fetal monitor offering a fragile sense of calm. My eyes drifted toward the window where the lights of Sacramento glowed softly in the distance. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to imagine a future beyond fear. A home where my daughter would laugh freely. A marriage unshadowed by Victoria's manipulations. A life where my career wasn't defined by someone else's attempt to destroy it. That hope lasted less than a minute. Because the door to my room swung open with a force that made my heart lurch. Victoria stood in the doorway. She was still wearing the same expensive coat she wore the night she was escorted from the gala, though now it hung off her shoulders in disarray. Her hair was not perfectly curled. Her makeup was smeared. She looked nothing like the poised woman who dominated charity stages. She looked feral, desperate, cornered, and dangerous. My pulse spiked instantly. I pressed the call button beside the bed, but she moved fast, slamming her hand down on the switch, cutting off the signal. Then she closed the door behind her, locking it. "You ruined my life," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, nothing like the confident tone she wielded at social events. "You destroyed everything I built." I forced my breath to steady. "I didn't destroy anything. You did that when you stole from your own family and attacked mine." She stepped closer. "And you think they'll thank you for this? You think exposing me makes you some kind of hero?" She laughed, then a sharp, unhinged sound. "You renave, Ethan may love you now, but love fades. What doesn't fade is the damage you've done. You turned my son against me, my own son." He turned because he saw the truth. Her eyes narrowed. "No, he turned because you manipulated him. The same way you manipulated that old man in the wheelchair. Pretending he's still lucid, feeding him lies. Henry gave me the key. I cut in. He knew exactly what he was doing." Victoria's expression twisted. "You little liar." She took another step. My heart thundered against my ribs. I looked toward the hallway. No Ethan, no nurses, no one. "What do you want?" I whispered. She stared at my stomach, round, full, undeniably alive. "I want you gone," she said softly. "You've done enough damage. You don't deserve this family. You don't deserve him. And you definitely don't deserve that baby." Fear surged through me so violently my vision blurred. I instinctively wrapped my arms around my belly, stepping back until my shoulders pressed against the wall. "Victoria," I said, my voice shaking despite my effort to steady it. "Stop. Whatever you're rethinking." She lunged. Her hand shot out toward my stomach, fingers curled like claws. I twisted away, nearly slipping on the polished floor. Pain flashed across my abdomen, not from her touch, but from the force of my movement. Panic roared through me. I reached for the nearest object, a glass water pitcher, and lifted it in warning. "Don't touch me!" I shouted. Her face contorted. "Ungrateful girl, everything I did was to protect this family." She lunged again, and then the door exploded open. Ethan burst into the room with 2 security officers on his heels. His expression morphed into something primal, something I had never seen on him before. He grabbed Victoria's arm and pulled her away from me with a force that stunned everyone in the room. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he roared. Victoria shrieked, trying to wrench free. "She's lying about everything. She forged those documents. She wants to ruin our legacy." "Your legacy ruined itself," Ethan snapped, "and you were never coming near my wife or child again." Security restrained her. She kicked and cursed, spitting venomous accusations until her voice broke. Even as they dragged her from the room, her eyes stayed locked on me, wide and wild, filled with a hatred that should have chilled me. It didn't. It saddened me, because in that moment, I realized something profoundly human. Victoria wasn't simply evil. She was drowning in her own fear of irrelevance. Losing control terrified her more than losing freedom. and the person who symbolized that loss was me. When the door finally closed, I collapsed into Ethan's arms. My body shook from shock, from adrenaline, from the knowledge that we had come seconds away from a tragedy no evidence could undo. He pressed his forehead against mine. "I'm so sorry, I should have been here. I should have protected you." "You did," I whispered. "You came." He held me tight, as if anchoring me back into the world. After the chaos settled, the hospital moved me to a secure wing. Extra staff was assigned. Ethan refused to leave my side. And for the first time since joining the Reynolds family, I genuinely felt safe, not because danger had disappeared, but because we had finally confronted it head-on. 4 days later, labor began again. This time it wasn't stress. It wasn't fear. It was life, real, unstoppable life demanding to be welcomed into the world. The delivery was long but steady. Ethan never left my side. And when our daughter's first cry echoed through the room, something inside me broke open in the best way possible. Every fear, every humiliation, every painful moment of the past months washed away as they placed her in my arms. Emma Grace Reynolds. She was tiny and perfect, with Ethan's eyes and a quiet strength I recognized instantly. A strength she must have felt every time I fought to protect her. Ethan kissed my forehead, tears streaking down his cheeks. "She's our new beginning," he whispered. And she was. Victoria was arrested 2 days later. The charges ranged from embezzlement to conspiracy to defamation. Brittany issued a real apology, a broken, remorseful one, and disappeared from the spotlight. The Reynolds Foundation underwent restructuring. Ethan took temporary leadership, and Henry, with a spark of clarity that stunned everyone, gave a statement to investigators confirming everything. Our family didn't just survive the storm. We rebuilt after it. And somewhere along the way, between the fear, the resilience, and the fierce love that carried us, I discovered something I never expected. Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet conviction that you deserve a life free from cruelty. Sometimes it's the refusal to break. And sometimes it's choosing to write your own ending, instead of accepting the one someone else tries to force on you. If there is one truth that rises from the wreckage of everything Claire endured, it is that strength is often discovered only in the moments when life feels intent on breaking us. Her journey through betrayal, humiliation, manipulation, and fear revealed a lesson universal to anyone who has ever been underestimated or pushed aside. Of power does not belong solely to those born into wealth, influence, or prestige. Real power belongs to those who refuse to surrender their identity even when the world actively tries to rip it away. Claire entered the Reynolds family believing she needed their acceptance to belong. But the storm, both literal and metaphorical, taught her that belonging built on others' approval is fragile. Belonging built on truth and self-worth is unshakable. Another profound lesson lies in understanding the quiet roots of courage. Many people imagine courage as something loud, shouting back at cruelty, confronting injustice on the spot, or refusing every insult with bold defiance. But Claire's story teaches a different kind of bravery, the bravery of endurance, of picking oneself up after humiliation, of using pain as fuel instead of allowing it to shape who we are. Courage is not always the absence of fear. More often, it's the willingness to walk forward while fear claws at your spine. Claire didn't fight back immediately because she was weak. She fought back when she finally saw the full scope of what she was facing, and when she realized she no longer had anything left to lose except her own dignity. That moment when one stops asking, "Why me?" and begins saying, "Watch me," is the true birthplace of strength. Her battle with Victoria exposes another lesson: that evil rarely presents itself as monstrous from the beginning. It often comes dressed in elegance, refinement, good manners, and carefully rehearsed sympathy. Victoria didn't attack Claire with open hostility at first. She tested her, pushed boundaries, manipulated perception, and waited to see how much she could get away with. This is a type of cruelty many people experience in silence, cruelty that is subtle, socially acceptable, and deeply toxic. The story reveals that the most dangerous people are often those who weaponize charm. Their power lies in convincing others that anyone who accuses them must be exaggerating. And the lesson here is clear: trust your instincts. When someone's words are sweet but their actions consistently harm, believe the actions. At its core, the story also illustrates that truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of rising. For years, Victoria built her empire on deception, embezzlement disguised as executive decisions, fraud masked by philanthropy, and personal insecurities hidden behind an iron facade of confidence. She relied on money to silence questions and status to intimidate challengers. But even the strongest lies crack under pressure when someone courageous enough decides to shine a light on them. Claire's courage didn't expose Victoria alone. Henry's quiet vigilance, Dolly's compassion, Ethan's awakening, and even Brittany's implosion all contributed to revealing the truth. The lesson here is that corruption can survive as long as good people remain passive. The moment someone chooses to act, even the mightiest structures can fall. Another takeaway from Claire's story is the importance of chosen family. Blood may connect people, but loyalty, empathy, and love define true relationships. Ethan's evolution, his choice to stand beside Claire instead of behind his family's legacy, proved that genuine love demands accountability. A partner who refuses to see your suffering is no partner at all. For so long, Claire believed she needed to endure the Reynolds family's cruelty to prove her place beside Ethan. But the truth was the opposite. Ethan proved his place beside her by rejecting everything that harmed her. In that sense, the story teaches that relationships thrive not when two people share a home or a name, but when they share values, courage, and an unwavering commitment to each other's well-being. There is also a powerful message about motherhood, both the destructive and the redemptive kind. Victoria weaponized the title of mother as justification for control, deceit, and manipulation. She believed protecting her family meant protecting her power. Claire, on the other hand, discovered her fiercest strength the moment she realized she was carrying a child who depended on her courage. It was not vengeance that motivated her, it was the desire to build a world where her daughter would never know the same cruelty. Emma's existence shifted the story's entire emotional gravity, revealing a universal truth: becoming responsible for another life often awakens the deepest reserves of strength and integrity we did not know we possessed. Finally, the story reinforces a lesson that resonates far beyond fiction. Storms do not come to destroy us, they come to clear what was never meant to remain. Claire's storm washed away the illusion that she needed to fit into the Reynolds dynasty. It washed away the image of perfection Victoria tried to project. It exposed the cracks beneath the marble floors and polished smiles. And when the storm passed, what remained was not ruin, it was renewal. A new family built on honesty instead of secrets. A new legacy built on integrity instead of influence. A new beginning shaped not by what was taken from her, but by what she chose to reclaim. In the end, the greatest lesson of all is this: strength grows quietly. Healing begins in the moments after survival. And the fiercest victories often come not from overpowering others, but from refusing to let others overpower your truth. Claire's story is a reminder that no matter how dark a storm may seem, there is always a dawn waiting on the other side, one that reveals who we truly are, and who we were always meant to become.
If you find this video helpful, don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss upcoming videos. If you have any suggestions or questions, feel free to leave a comment below. I'd really love to